January 15, 2024, Yakutsk, Sakha Republic, Russia, 7:45 a.m. local time. The morning sun barely touched the frozen rooftops as the temperature hovered at a bone-cracking -45 degrees Celsius. Yet inside a modest wooden cabin on the outskirts of this Siberian city, a frail yet remarkably alert woman named Agafya Morozova sat by her wood-burning stove, sipping a steaming cup of wild herb tea. The official records claimed she was 123 years old, though her wrinkled face and sharp, crystal-clear eyes told a story far older than paperwork could ever confirm. Local villagers spoke of her with the same reverence they reserved for ancient legends. They claimed she had lived through the Russian Empire, the Soviet Union, 2 world wars, the space race, and the internet age without once setting foot in a hospital. Scientists had flown from as far as Japan and the United States to study her, and every time they left with the same question unanswered. How was this possible? Agafya herself was frustratingly evasive, answering questions about her longevity, with cryptic phrases like, "The earth tells you when it's time to rest," or "Don't feed your death before it comes." Her story began in the closing years of the 19th century, or so she said, born in a remote settlement accessible only by river or winter ice road, where the air was cleaner than most of us will ever breathe, and the diet was devoid of processed food. Her early years were a struggle for survival, long winters without sunlight, hunting and foraging for food, drinking only from glacier-fed streams, and sleeping according to the rhythm of the seasons. These conditions, which modern people might call harsh, were to her simply life. She ate only what she could grow, catch, or barter, relying heavily on root vegetables, berries, fermented milk, and game meat. There was no sugar, no fried foods, no chemical additives. Her world was a living time capsule from before industrialized nutrition. But longevity, according to Agafya, wasn't only about what you ate, it was about what you carried inside. She claimed that fear, anger, and greed were the real killers, and that she had learned early in life to let go of grudges and avoid unnecessary stress. This belief was not based on modern psychology, but on old Siberian spiritual teachings, where it was said that negative emotions freeze the blood and weigh down the bones. What fascinated researchers most was that, despite her age, her memory was razor-sharp. She could recite poems she had learned as a child and recall minute details of events from before World War I, as though they had happened yesterday. Some believe she carried a unique genetic mutation that slowed aging, while others suspected it was the untouched purity of her environment combined with the absence of modern-day toxins. But there was a deeper, unspoken mystery. How could a woman living in such isolation, far from advanced medicine, have survived outbreaks of disease, famines, and political upheaval that wiped out entire generations? Whispers in the village told of herbal remedies she prepared from rare plants found only deep in the taiga, plants whose names she refused to share, saying only, "Some secrets are given to you to keep, not to tell." The air of mystery deepened when an old, grainy photograph emerged, allegedly taken in 1912, showing a young girl with the same striking eyes and facial structure as Agafya, standing next to a man in traditional Cossack attire. If authentic, it would place her birth even earlier than claimed, pushing her age closer to 130. Whether this was proof or folklore didn't seem to matter to the locals. To them, Agafya was a living treasure, a reminder of a world where life was both brutally hard and unimaginably pure. For now, the truth about her age remained locked away in the frozen silence of Siberia. But her existence had already sparked global curiosity. Scientists wanted to decode her DNA. Historians wanted to document her life, and everyday people wanted to know if she held the ultimate secret to long life. And yet, as the wind howled outside and frost crept up her window panes, Agafya simply smiled at her visitors and said, "You will live as long as you are meant to. No more, no less." Her calm certainty was more unsettling than any scientific explanation. And in that moment, it was clear this was not just a story about a woman defying time, but about the hidden laws of life itself. February 2nd, 1904, MJ River Valley, Yakutsk Oblast, Russian Empire, 6:10 a.m. local time. The first light of dawn spilled faintly over the snow-covered hills, casting an icy glow across the frozen river where a young girl barely 6 years old was helping her mother break a hole in the ice to fetch water. This was Agafia Morozova's earliest memory, one she would recount over a century later with a clarity that unsettled scientists and historians alike. In her world, childhood was not marked by toys or schooling, but by survival. By the time most children today would be learning to read, she was learning how to skin a hare, recognize edible berries, and prepare herbal infusions that could mean the difference between life and death during the endless Siberian winters. Her family lived in a log hut built by her father, a stoic man who wore his Cossack heritage-like armor, and her mother, a quiet yet fiercely capable woman who believed that the earth itself was a living teacher. There was no calendar on the Waltham was measured by the movements of the sun and the phases of the moon. Her diet in those days was as primitive as it was pure: root vegetables stored in earthen pits, fermented milk kept cool in the snow, and strips of dried fish that lasted through the bitterest months. But it wasn't just the physical hardships that shaped her, it was the cultural isolation. The Amga River Valley was days away from the nearest trading post, and news of the outside world arrived only when traveling merchants or exiled political prisoners passed through. Agafia grew up without knowing what a city truly was. Yet she learned to read from an old church psalter her father kept hidden, as reading was a rare skill in their region. This early literacy gave her a mind as sharp as her survival instincts. She often spoke of a winter when a mysterious illness swept through nearby villages, killing dozens. Her family survived, she said, by drinking an infusion made from white root and taiga moss, plants she later claimed could cool the fever without cooling the blood. Whether this was folk medicine or forgotten science, no one could say, but the fact remained she and her family lived while others perished. As she grew older, so too did her responsibilities. By the time she was a teenager, she could navigate the taiga with the skill of a seasoned trapper. Reading the tracks in the snow and listening to the subtle language of the forest, her father taught her how to predict storms by the shape of the clouds and the movement of ravens. These skills were not romanticized traditions, they were survival code, passed down from ancestors who had endured the unforgiving land for centuries. Yet even in this frozen wilderness, whispers of the changing world reached them. In 1914, when Agafia was said to be 16, a traveling merchant brought news that Europe was at war. She didn't yet know what war meant, but over the next few years, she would see the effects: fewer traders passing through, shortages of salt and metal goods, and strange, worried expressions on the faces of the men. Around this time, an event occurred that would become a cornerstone of her legend. She claimed that during one of the darkest winters, when the river ice was too thin to cross and hunting had failed, she wandered deep into the forest in search of food. There she encountered an elderly Iwanki shaman, a man whose face was weathered, like ancient bark. He offered her a small pouch containing dried herbs and told her to keep it always, saying this will keep the years from finding you too soon. She never revealed what was inside that pouch, and even decades later, she would only smile and say, "It worked, didn't it?" Some dismissed the story as folklore, others as metaphor. But those who knew her best swore she always carried a small, worn leather pouch tucked under her clothing. This period of her life forged the foundation of her health and longevity, not in modern terms of vitamins and antioxidants, but through a way of living in complete harmony with her environment. She woke with the sun, slept when it set, ate only whole, unprocessed foods, drank only from natural water sources, and spent most of her life physically active in the cleanest air imaginable. Modern researchers would later note that these habits, combined with minimal exposure to pollution or artificial light, could explain her remarkable vitality. But Agafia herself insisted the real secret was knowing your place in the order of things and not chasing after the noise of the world. She believed that modern life shortened people's years not just because of unhealthy food or sedentary habits, but because it pulled them away from the rhythm of the earth. The more her story spread in later years, the more outsiders wanted to dissect her life for scientific answers. Yet the deeper they looked, the more they found themselves facing an unexplainable truth. Perhaps longevity was not something you could simply measure or bottle it, was something you had to live. As winter winds screamed across the river valley and snow buried the world in white silence, the young Agafia continued her life, unaware that the years ahead would carry her across revolutions, wars, and an entirely different Russia. But one thing was already clear: this was no ordinary life, and her time-defying journey was only just beginning. October 25, 1917, Yakutsk city outskirts, Russian Republic, 7:42 p.m. local time. The icy wind from the Lena River carried with it the distant sound of bells and gunfire, an eerie combination that would signal the end of one Russia and the beginning of another. Agafia Morozova, now a young woman of 19, had traveled with her father to the outskirts of Yakutsk to trade furs for salt, iron tools, and cloth, simple necessities that kept their remote household alive. But that night, as she huddled in the back of a wagon, she overheard whispers that would forever change the country's course. The Bolsheviks had seized power in Petrograd. For most rural Siberians, politics was a far-off game, but soon the ripples of the Russian Revolution would crash hard against even the most distant corners of the empire. In the months that followed, chaos spread like wildfire. Food shortages worsened, soldiers deserted the front lines, and the new Soviet authorities began demanding grain and supplies from villages. Many in her community resisted, leading to violent crackdowns. Agafia's father was arrested briefly for refusing to hand over his winter stores, and although he was released, the family was marked as unreliable. This label was dangerous. It could mean forced relocation or worse. They decided to vanish into the taiga entirely, retreating deeper into the wilderness than they had ever gone before. This decision, though, made out of fear, may have saved their lives and extended Agafia's astonishing longevity. Removed from human conflict, she lived in near-complete isolation for years, relying solely on foraging, hunting, and the knowledge her parents had passed down. It was during this time that she began to take full control of her own survival skills. She learned to craft snowshoes from birch and sinew, tan hides into waterproof boots, and create shelters that could withstand the -50-degree nights. More importantly, she refined her understanding of medicinal plants. Building on the strange wisdom imparted by the Awenki shaman years earlier, she experimented with decoctions made from Siberian ginseng, chaga mushroom, and rhodiola rosea plants that modern science now confirms have adaptogenic properties, strengthening the body's resistance to stress and fatigue. Yet Agafia claimed her use of them was guided not by trial and error, but by listening to the plants. Ford would later say, "If you ask them what they can give you, they will tell you, but only if you are quiet enough." This mystical perspective baffled botanists who studied her in later years, but none could deny her vigor.
While women her age in the outside world were already succumbing to disease, poor nutrition, or childbirth complications,
Agafia's health remained almost unnervingly perfect. Her hair stayed thick, her teeth strong, her eyes bright. In her 30s, she could still trek 20 miles in snow without stopping. Her diet in those isolated years was stripped of any processed or refined foods: wild game, berries, pine, nuts, river fish, fermented root vegetables, and her physical labor was constant but varied, keeping her body agile. But as the 1920s turned into the 1930s, even the deep taiga could not keep the Soviet state at bay. Officials searching for tax evaders and hermit settlers began pushing into remote Siberia. In 1931, Agafia was discovered by a census team, and for the first time in over a decade, she was recorded as a living person in the Soviet Union. They were stunned to find a woman in her early 30s who looked closer to her early 20s, radiating a vitality few city dwellers could match. She refused offers to move to a settlement, insisting, "I live with the forest, I will not leave it." Yet history would not leave her alone. In 1941, when Nazi Germany invaded the Soviet Union, Yakutia became a key resource hub, and able-bodied men from the region were conscripted en masse. Agafia, now in her 40s, volunteered to help by hunting and providing preserved meats for soldiers stationed in Siberia. It was during this wartime period that outsiders began to note her extraordinary resilience. While food shortages and wartime stress visibly aged her peers, Agafia seemed immune to decline. A Soviet army medic who examined her in 1943 wrote in his notes, "The patient claims to be 45. Physically, she appears no older than 28. Heart rate, blood pressure, and stamina are that of a trained athlete. Diet appears to be entirely natural, with no processed goods. Skin elasticity is remarkable for age claimed." These records, preserved in a regional archive, would later serve as some of the earliest scientific evidence of her uncanny aging process. When the war ended, she returned fully to her forest life, retreating once more from the politics and rebuilding her remote homestead. But now, something had shifted. Word of her had begun to circulate quietly among scientists, explorers, and even Soviet officials. She was becoming, without trying, a living legend, and as she entered her 50s without a single gray hair, the whispers grew louder. Was Agafia Morozova simply blessed with extraordinary genetics? Or was she living proof that human aging could be slowed to a crawl? The answer, it seemed, was still hidden deep within the Siberian wilds, where the snow kept her secrets and the years did not seem to touch her. February 3, 1960, Yakutsk State Medical Institute, Soviet Union, 9:15 a.m. local time. The temperature outside was a brutal minus 48 degrees Celsius, the kind of cold that could kill a man in minutes. But inside the brightly lit examination room, a woman who was about to turn 62 sat calmly on a wooden chair, her hands folded in her lap, her dark hair streaked only slightly with gray. This was Agafia Morozova, and for the first time in her life, she had agreed to a full medical evaluation. The doctors, young and old alike, were already murmuring among themselves this was no ordinary patient. Her pulse was steady and strong. Her skin was almost entirely free of wrinkles. Her teeth were intact. Her vision perfect. Her reflexes sharp. Blood tests revealed no sign of the degenerative changes that would be expected in someone her age. If I didn't know her birth records, one physician whispered to another, I'd think she was in her early 40s. This examination came about after a group of Soviet researchers, intrigued by the wartime records of a woman who does not age, petitioned to study her for a longevity project. The Soviet Union, locked in a Cold War race for technological and biological superiority, was eager to explore anything that might give it an advantage even, if that meant studying a hermit from the Siberian taiga. Agafia, however, was reluctant. She agreed only after assurances that she could return to her forest home immediately afterward. For 2 weeks, the scientists ran every test they could think of. They measured bone density, lung capacity, cardiovascular performance, and hormone levels. In nearly every category, Agafia's body performed like that of someone 20 to 25 years younger. More baffling was her mental clarity memory tests, problem-solving exercises, and reaction time assessments all placed her far above average for her supposed age group. When asked about her lifestyle, she gave simple answers. I wake with the sun. I walk far. I eat only what grows or runs in my land. I do not eat to be full. I eat to work. I breathe deeply, to rest when the forest rests. She described a daily routine that alternated between intense physical labor chopping wood, hauling water, setting traps, and long periods of stillness, sitting quietly by the river or listening to the wind through the pines. What the scientists couldn't quite grasp was that she had lived almost entirely outside the modern world for 6 decades. No processed foods, no artificial light, no constant noise, no exposure to industrial pollution. She laughed when a young medical student asked if she drank vodka. "Why would I drink something that burns the throat?" she replied. But perhaps the most fascinating discovery came from her blood work. She had unusually high levels of certain antioxidants and an extremely low level of systemic inflammation, both indicators now known to be linked to slower aging. In 1960, these were only dimly understood, but the researchers suspected her diet rich in wild berries. Fatty fish and herbs played a key role. Yet even as they took their notes and drew their samples, there was something they could not measure, her almost spiritual connection to the natural world. One evening, after the day's tests, she spoke quietly to a young nurse about the Awenki shaman she had met as a girl. She said the old woman had told her, The forest will feed you, but it will also keep your years if you walk gently. Agafia believed this literally. She claimed that, by aligning her life to the rhythms of the seasons, by never taking more from the land than she needed, she had somehow kept her body in balance with time itself. After the study concluded, she refused all offers to remain in Yakutsk or to move to a warmer region. She returned to her log cabin in the taiga, carrying only a few gifts from the scientist's warm boots, a metal pot and a small radio, though she later claimed she rarely turned it on. As the 1960s rolled on, she lived quietly, but rumors about her began to spread again, this time beyond the Soviet Union. Western journalists visiting Yakutsk occasionally heard about the woman in the forest who doesn't age and tried to find her, but Agafia avoided them. Still, her name began appearing in obscure medical journals, fueling speculation that she might be one of the longest-living, healthiest humans in recorded history. In 1975, when she was 77, a Soviet botanist visited her and was stunned to find her chopping firewood with the strength and posture of a much younger woman. "She is a living time machine," he wrote in his notes. "A body from the past, untouched by the poisons of the present." What neither he nor anyone else knew was that Agafia was entering the period of her life that would truly cement her as a mystery, because while most humans slow down in their 80s, she was about to prove that her pace of life would not change at all. April 12, 2004, near the Aldan River, Sakha, Republic Yakutia, Russia, 6:42 a.m. local time. The early spring air was still sharp with frost, but the river ice had begun to crack and shift, groaning like distant thunder. On a small rise above the water stood a woman wrapped in a thick reindeer hide coat, her figure straight as a birch tree. She leaned on no stick, wore no glasses, and moved with the sure-footed ease of someone decades younger. This was Agafia Morozova, and according to official records, she was 126 years old. By now, her story had leaked far beyond Russia. Reporters from Japan, Germany, and the United States had come searching for her over the years, sometimes trudging for days through the snow or arriving by helicopter. Most returned empty-handed. She was skilled at avoiding unwanted attention, but every so often she allowed a visitor, and in 2004, for reasons she never explained, she permitted a documentary crew from France to spend 3 days with her. The footage they captured would astonish the world. Viewers saw a woman who rose at dawn, chopped wood, carried water from a hole in the river ice, and prepared meals of fish, berries, and wild greens without a trace of hesitation in her movements. Her hands were strong and steady, her voice firm, her memory sharp. When asked about her age, she smiled faintly. "I do not count the years anymore. If you do not think about time, time forgets you." Scientists who studied the documentary were baffled. By all accounts, she should have been frail, her bones brittle, her joints stiff. Yet her medical records, last updated in the early 1990s, showed no signs of severe arthritis, heart disease, or dementia. One Japanese longevity expert remarked, "If her birth date is accurate, she is not just an outlier, she is an impossibility." Agafia herself dismissed the idea that she was special. She attributed her vitality to living as humans were meant to live, moving daily, eating only pure and seasonal food, sleeping with the rhythms of daylight, and never letting her mind become idle. She avoided all processed sugar, never smoked, and rarely consumed alcohol. But there was something else, something she spoke of quietly, almost as a confession. She believed her life had been extended because she had never broken the balance with the land. She claimed the forest had kept her years in exchange for her respect. "When you take without giving back, you shorten your life," she told the filmmakers. "I always give back." By 2008, rumors spread that she had turned 130. Though official verification was impossible, Soviet archives that could have confirmed her birth date had been partly destroyed in a fire. Still, the locals in Yakutsk swore she was telling the truth. In the winter of 2011, a helicopter pilot delivering supplies to a remote village spotted smoke rising from a chimney deep in the taiga. Curious, he landed nearby and discovered Agafia splitting firewood. She was cordial but told him firmly, "Do not return. I am not ready to leave." That was the last confirmed sighting. By 2015, her cabin showed no signs of life, no smoke, no footprints, no fishing holes in the ice. Some believe she passed away quietly in her sleep, the forest claiming her as one of its own. Others insist she simply moved deeper into the wilderness, seeking a place where no one could find her, without a body or grave. The truth remains uncertain. Yet the legend of Agafia Morozova continues to ripple across the world, appearing in medical conferences, survivalist forums, and spiritual retreats. She has become a symbol of the possibility that human life can be far longer and healthier than we've been taught to believe, if only we live in harmony with nature. Her story is told in whispers among the Owenki people, who say she still walks the forest trails at dawn, her footsteps as light as a snow hare's, whether she truly lived past 130 or not. One fact is undeniable: she defied every expectation of aging, leaving behind a mystery that science still cannot fully explain. And perhaps that is the final lesson she wanted to give: some secrets are not meant to be solved, only respected.